Welcome everybody to the inauguration of the public monthly speaker series here at the Center for Heterodox Economics that I am directing. My name is Clara Matei. I'm economics professor here at the University of Tulsa, and it is with great pleasure that we begin this project because it is timelier than ever. Our economic system has never before shown its authentic face of economic violence as in the present moment. And it is in this moment that we need to vindicate economics as a science of emancipation that can help us actually understand what the issues are, rather than play the game that has been played for so many years, in which economics as a science has served the fundamental role of concealing rather than explaining. Concealing is not just a matter of an epistemic problem. It is actually a deeply political role economics has played in fundamentally creating this passive acceptance for the economic system we live in. And this is why instead the Che wants to do something different. We are bringing speakers, academics, organizers to the community so that we can have a constructive dialogue for a different form of economic knowledge that can actually serve people to feel empowered for social change. And we had Rick Wolf and Kalia Kuno with us last Friday. The room was packed. We have over 140 people in person, people that came from all over Tulsa, through flyers, through outreach that was very local. And we had the pleasure to discuss a topic that is taboo for economics. This topic is exploitation. Indeed, you recognize how complicit the economic science is in supporting the current economic order by looking at how it has expelled the concept of exploitation from the economic models. Indeed, the idea here is that inequality is ultimately an issue of redistribution or of individual behavior. What we show as heterodox economists is that inequality is actually grounded on the social relations of production that are deeply exploitative. In fact, exploitation is not just an exceptional circumstance of mistreatment because of an evil boss. We wish it was the case. What we need to understand as scholars of economics is that exploitation is structural to our economic system. There would be no economic growth without exploitation grounding it. And when we talk about exploitation, we mean that all wage workers are by definition producing more value for their employers than the money they get in their paychecks. In fact, once we are compelled to sell our capacity to work on the market in order to survive, because we do not have other options if we want to pay for healthcare, education, a house, food, what happens is that for the majority of the day, we're actually working for free. It is this part of free work that we deliver for our employer that is the source of value, of profit as we know it today. And this is interesting because standard economics instead tells us that profit is basically the fair compensation for the productivity of capital. And thus what the entrepreneur or the business or the investor should keep because of their contribution to the production process. You see how different lenses offer a completely different understanding of the economic system, and thus a completely different political understanding of what's happening. Exploitation is indeed a topic that is taboo because it's potentially disruptive, because it actually goes deeply into understanding how unjust our whole economic system is at its very roots. We're here to discuss this with no better speakers than Kalia Kuno, organizer at Cooperation Jackson, and Richard Wolf, world-renowned economist who has founded the UMass Economics Department and is now visiting scholar at the New School, has currently produced a book called Understanding Capitalism, and of course is the protagonist of the great show Economic Update that is weekly and is aired in hundreds of radio stations. The event was wonderful. I hope you can participate and listen to Rick's Wolf first intervention, followed by Kalia Kuno. Thank you so much for being with us.
Okay. I want to thank Clara Mate. I want to thank everyone at the University of Tulsa for being so kind as to invite me. I wish the flu hadn't gotten to me so that I could be with you in Oklahoma, which I would love to visit on top of being with you this evening. Let me jump right into the top said, something that we don't talk about, a taboo topic that has become so taboo that many people are afraid even to go into that kind of a discussion. So I'm in a way bringing back to the forefront of our imaginations and of our thinking something deeply buried inside us that we already know because we've seen it around us, even if we didn't know what we were looking at. So let's begin. In every human community, thousands of years ago or right now, whether it's a large community of millions or a small community of a few people living together, the following has always been true. Some portion of the people, some portion, get up and go to work most days of the week. They use their brains and their muscles to produce the goods and services that we all rely on. The food, the clothing, the shelter. But it has always been true that not all the people in any community do it. Most of the time, there are people in the community who do not work, who do not go and use their brains and muscles to transform nature into goods and services we consume. And you know that. For example, children, say between the ages of 0 and 4 or 5 years of age, those are people who consume food, clothing, shelter, but they do not produce it. Someone has to produce food, clothing, and shelter without consuming what they produced so that there can be people who consume without producing. Babies, children. But now move on with me. It could be the elderly. It could be people who are not feeling well, sick folks. We would like them to live, to get better. The children should grow up. The elderly should pass on their wisdom. And so human communities have always organized work so that some people do it, but don't consume everything they produce, so that there is an extra, an output over and above what the workers themselves consume to enable other people to live without working. Babies, elderly, the sick. But in modern society, we've taken this ancient truth to a whole new level. Over the millennia, we have become able, as a species, to use tools and equipment and to be able to produce a vast array of output, so that it has become true that the output we can produce in any community, say the United States, say Spain, say New Jersey, it doesn't matter. In any of these communities, our technology enables us to produce an enormous output, so that when we take a portion of it to feed, clothe, and shelter the workers themselves, there's an enormous leftover. In economics, we've called it a surplus. It's just the portion of output not consumed by the workers who produced the output. So that in a modern society, and that's been true now for thousands of years, it has been possible to arrange society in a way that you and I may take for granted, but we shouldn't. And you'll see why as I finish my explanation. I'm going to start with this system you all know, slavery. In slavery, here's how it works. The slaves do the work. They produce the food, the clothing, the shelter, the grand mansions, the plantations, all of it. They give it all to somebody else who's not a worker like them. We know their name, master. They give everything they produce to the master. And the master takes a portion of what the slaves have produced and gives it back to the slaves so that they can feed, clothe, and shelter themselves. He knows he has to do it, the master does, because otherwise the slaves would die, and then where would he be? Slavery is a system in which the slaves produce a surplus that sustains the masters. They get to eat, live in lovely places, wear fancy clothes, because other people do the work. Okay, here's a second system that we've had, which is organized in a very similar way. Feudalism. It's what existed in Europe for 1,000 or more years. In that situation, we had serfs, people who farmed the land. And they had to produce not just enough to feed themselves, keep their farm going. They always had to produce more, which they delivered to the Lord. And the name feudalism gave for that surplus that the serfs produced but did not themselves consume, give it to the Lord, that was called rent, a word we still use, even if we use it in a different way. But now let me bring this to our own lives, yours, mine, right now. The slaves were never happy with the situation I just described. They felt that they were ripped off, that they were made to work harder and harder, while they weren't given more to eat and enjoy, because they were worked harder by the master so that the masters would get that surplus, and that the surplus would be as big as possible. And ditto with the lords and the serfs. So the slaves weren't happy, and in the long run, they got rid of slavery. They wanted to be free of it. They wanted freedom from slavery. And you know what, the serfs, it was the same. They didn't like having to work so hard to deliver ever larger rents that were demanded by the feudal lords. And so they got rid of feudalism. And then 2 or 3 centuries ago, a new system emerged. Just as feudalism emerged out of the collapse of slavery, so a modern system we live in today, capitalism, grew out of the collapse of feudalism. And the people who made the break in the American and French revolutions refused to continue feudalism. The United States' Revolutionary War against King George III in England didn't fight to be independent to set up their own king. They had it with kings, no more. And they didn't want feudalism. No serfs, no lords. They would be the new system, capitalism. But here is the second most important point for me to make this evening. The effort of slaves to be free, the effort of serfs to be free, resulted in them bringing about capitalism, which was different from slavery because nobody can own another person. It was different from feudalism because we weren't all farmers who had to deliver rents to lords. Instead, we had a new system called capitalism, in which the two roles were not master slave or lord and serf, but they were employer and employee. And the major point I want to stress to you is that the honest, sincere effort to break out of slavery and to break out of feudalism, which is the history we all come out of the last several thousand years, now presents us with a new challenge, because the capitalism that they hoped would bring freedom didn't do it. Why not? Because the same exploitation, the same situation where a large group of people produce more than they get, that enables a very small group of people, the masters, the lords, to live very high off the hog, to have great luxury. We still have it. Employers take the place of masters. And yes, employees take the place of slaves, something employees in America are learning to their horror more today than at any time in the recent past. The employer can fire us, take away our job, take away our income. The federal government is leading the way right now in doing that. Here's the problem. The people at the top, the masters, the lords, the employers, because they control the situation, because the rest of us produce the surplus for them, they keep it. They make themselves very rich. We become more and more productive, but we don't enjoy the fruits of our labor because they get it. In the simplest way I know, think of it this way. When you go and you look for a job and you talk to your employer, and you and the employer agree that you will be paid, let's say, $20 an hour, you know, without me explaining it, that the only reason that employer would ever pay you $20 for an hour of your work is if the employer knew that by working an hour, you would add to the quantity or the quality of what that employer produces, and he would get more than $20 from selling the extra your work yields. The difference between what he gets when he sells the fruit of your labor and the $20 he pays you, that is what he keeps. That's what makes him rich. You produce more than he pays you to do it. That's exploitation. If you want to know why we have Elon Musk with $400 billion, it's because tens of thousands of workers in Tesla factories are producing much more than he pays them, and he keeps it. So he's rich, and those workers are not. If you want to understand why some people have enormous power and the rest of us so little, it's because of the way we organize work so that the majority of people are employees. According to the US Census, 3% of Americans are employers, and the other 97%, you and me, are not. So we are the producers of the surplus. We are the exploited. And of course, why am I telling you this? Well, the details and the explanation is going to come from my friend and colleague, Kali Akuno. Let me only conclude this way. The human race does not need to divide the workplace between a small number of people at the top, masters, lords, employers, and a vast amount of workers at the bottom. Yes, that's how it's been for a long time. And that's the problem. That's why we've had the struggles, the difficulties, and the crises, including the crisis of our capitalist system that we are living through. But what we can do that earlier generations hadn't understood, and what it is my job to pass on to you, is we can ask the question, maybe exploitation is the problem. Maybe what the slaves needed to be free was not to accept the idea that a few people should run the workplace and all the rest of us do what we are told. Maybe democracy is an even better idea than you might have thought, if only we would apply it to the workplace, not divide rulers and ruled. No, democracy always said one person, one vote. We all have the same influence on reaching the collective decision. Now imagine with me, if we had a workplace that was democratic, that was cooperative, that treated all of us equally, would we give some people $400 billion to play with, while other people don't have enough to send their kid to college, don't have enough to put food on the table, can't see their future clear? We would never do that. Good people don't. We have to ask the question. We have to dare. The workplace has to be reorganized to solve our problems. Because if we don't, the problems will continue to be as unsolved as they were in the past. Exploitation has been a problem for a long time. It doesn't need to. We have learned good things to do in society to make them better, but we have not gotten to the root of the problems of unequal wealth and income and unequal power and all that it implies. But we can, if we recognize that the organization of the workplace is not given by technology, there's no taboo in asking questions about it, and as Kali Akuno will tell you, there are already many examples in history, including here in the United States, of people who are busy doing exactly that. So it's my pleasure to lay the groundwork. I hope you all will think about these things and let Kali Akuno show you some of the ways this is being actualized by people like you and me right now. Thank you very much.
Rick, thank you so much. That was phenomenal, as always. Thank you so much. Yes, the ground is set for Kali Akuno. Kali is co-founder and co-director of Cooperation Jackson and co-editor and co-author of the book Jackson Rising, The Struggle for Economic Democracy and Black Self-Determination in Jackson, Mississippi. Kali served as the director of special project and external funding at the mayoral administration of late Lumumba of Jackson, Mississippi. His focus in this role was supporting cooperative development, the introduction of eco-friendly and carbon reduction methods of operation, and the promotion of human rights and international relations for the city. Thank you so much, Kali. The floor is yours. We're so happy to have you here.
Check, check. Okay, it works fine. All right, first of all, I'm honored to be invited to be a part of the opening of the project of this department. It's definitely an honor. I want to see this project around the big word, heterodox economics continue, because we need more. There has been an onslaught against this type of thinking and these types of programs for many a moon now. They've been too successful, which is why we don't have these type of discussions and debate. One of the reasons, not the sole reason, but one of the reasons why. So, and I'm bringing this up to you because this continues, because it will require your ongoing support to make it happen, right? So remember that and keep staying plugged in with the project, with the department, because that within itself, your attendance here is a form of pressure on the university, right? It's an indication of the value of what's here, and then we can translate that value into kind of an organized political force if we so choose, right? To keep it here, to have it grow, and to extend. So you all have a role to play. You all have a role to play. We all have a role to play in making these things successful and giving us what we need. All right, let me dive in a particular way, because one of the things that I often like to highlight is that many of the tools kind of embedded in the broad practices of economic democracy or the solidarity economy, we are all already employing in a number of different ways, but we have not given them political content or form. And it's our challenge to give them that political context and form so that they exert power, right? And the point of exerting and wielding this power is to transform the system, not just leave it in place, not reform it, not just exist by tinkering on the side, but ultimately eliminating it. Because as Rick and Clara basically laid out, and I hope that you agree, and if you don't agree, hopefully you will by the end of this conversation, or at least move a little bit in this direction. But we want to eliminate exploitation, right? And the domination of the market as it has come to be expressed in most of our societies. I would argue that, and I think Rick would basically lay it out, we are kind of closer to that, or the possibility of that, than at almost any other point in human history. Now that may seem like odd to say, or crazy to say in light of what's now going on, throughout the US empire, but do recognize, please do recognize that Trump is a symptom of a problem, right? Him and the neo-fascists are a particular response to the deep crisis of capitalism. They are a particular response which says that a hammer is needed to put all of us back in our place, right? To get us to be obedient, to get us to serve them. That is just one particular response to the deep crisis of the system. It will not work for long, despite how much chaos and confusion that they, try to muscle up. It will not work forever. Just know that. And I'm saying that because of a couple of different places I've spoken in here recently, there's a lot of bewilderment by what Trump is doing. And rightfully so, because, when you get used to a thing, even if it's necessarily bad, right, changing it up sometimes can be a little chaotic and a little crazy. But guess what? Y'all all knew this system was broken before he started dismantling it, right? Now, people may be a little distraught about how he's dismantling or what he's dismantling or what the reason is, right? But rest assured, if it's going to change in a way that we desire, it will be similarly chaotic, right? And there will be similar, probably even more forms of disruption if it came from our side, particularly if capital is not controlled, because capital loves to do this thing called a capital strike. Y'all ever heard of that? They're doing it now in part, right? Which is basically, imagine yourself being a little kid. I'm trying to use an analogy borrowed from Rick. Try to imagine yourself being a little kid. You come to the playground. There's only one problem. All the toys on the playground belong to one kid, right? And they may graciously let you play with them, but until they decided, I don't like you, for whatever reason, right? You're too tall. I'm short. You like pink. I like blue. I'm taking all my toys and I'm leaving, right? And leaving you in an empty sandbox. That's a capital strike. But basically, they just kind of take all their money, take all their resources, and say, well, I'm not going to invest in Tulsa anymore, right? I'm going to let Tulsa just basically starve, which is basically kind of what happened to this city and most other cities, throughout the latter part of the 20th century. So it's not like you don't know this in your own experience. You may not have necessarily all the language to describe it, or we may not use the same language to describe it, because it's not like there's just one official or dominant way. There are many ways to kind of, cut this cat, but we all know it. The piece that I think is hard for us to kind of grapple with is believing that it can be changed and that we can play a role in changing it, right? That is the trick. That is the big, big, big trick. Now, as part of an argument that we've been making, from the Cooperation Jackson end, is that we don't believe that we're going to trick you into doing something that you should already be doing. But sometimes we have to kind of uncover things to get us out of a deficit worldview. And what do I mean by that? Right? I'm a creature of the left, and there's lots of arguments among the left that we don't have this and we don't have that, and we don't have enough people. Now, if you count by the way we counted things in terms of like political parties and organizations of the 20th and the 19th century, then you're probably absolutely right. But if you count in a different way, by what people are objectively doing and how many people are doing it, you come up with a different conclusion, right? You come up with a profoundly different conclusion. So, there's more people working than ever before, part just because of population dynamics, but let's add that up into some other ways. Like, how many people do you all know in whatever community you live in, for instance, are engaged in some form of local agriculture? Right? You just raise your hand. Right? That's a good chunk of the room, not quite half, right? How many people do you know are engaged in some form of care work? How many people, and I'm making a slight distinction between care work and mutual aid. How many people you know are involved in some form of mutual aid work? How many of those people dialogue, connect, coordinate, and plan with each other? Across all those different fields. Very few. But see, the problem is not, you saw that we got numbers. It's more or less a question of dialogue, coordination, and democracy, right? A question of coordination and planning, right? Get organized. It's not that we lack people. We lack coordination. We lack organization. Now, there are some historic reasons for that. Some of our organizations in the past were pretty horrible, right? Let's just admit it. I've been in one. I've been in a very, it had its good parts, don't get it wrong. I enjoyed my time in the military of the movement, but, and there's things that you learn, but, oftentimes the way we organized, in part because of response, and it will continue to be this way, sadly, I hate to say it, but we have to learn some new lessons on how to treat and dialogue each other a lot better than we did in the past, right? But a lot of times our response towards a more militant response, which is something I come out of, was because, as what people call Black Wall Street, that got burned down, right? And not because that's what people wanted, but because there was a force determined that they were not going to have any rivals, right? And so you learn to organize in certain ways, but the difference is, okay, if I need to protect myself, I don't need to internalize all the different aspects that the military has, as we commonly understand it. And there's a gap between that we have to learn, and I'm not saying we figured it out, but we better figure it out, right? And I think, in particular, some of the tools that have emerged or been put in place, because some of these things have been around forever, but some of the things around attention to care, right? Attention to accountability, attention to privilege in different forms, like those things are becoming more central in our organizing work. And sometimes people may make an argument that they are a distraction, like, too much self-care centered without a collective balance can be an issue, but trust me, without some level of self-care, we'll all be burnt out or dead. So we have to figure out ways to how to incorporate those to be healthy and to be whole and to be in this struggle for the long haul. But I just want to convey to you that just in your own experience, I can tell you, and I will cite a little bit things about what we're doing in Cooperation Jackson, but the biggest argument that we're trying to promote and build, and something I've been doing in this Build and Fight series that Cooperation Jackson is doing, is really trying to highlight that particular point. It's not that we lack numbers, we lack coordination. We lack organization. But there are actually millions of people doing these types of activities already. Now, how do we elicit people to come out and get organized? What level of urgency, what level of kind of attention to opening up to trust and to networking do we need to do? This is where we make an argument that we have to start coordinating on every small levels to kind of build building blocks, right? Right, so some of the pieces that we are really trying to encourage folks to do, and it's not what we call this formula, is not something that we've made up. It's just an observation of what we see out, pretty much in the world, right? That we know, particularly some of us, I would say for me speaking personally, using I statements, I've been engaged in mutual aid work all my life, but it wasn't until Hurricane Katrina and me being there, seeing it in a particular level of scale, which opened up my mind to like, wait a minute, we could do this on a more permanent basis that is not just contingent upon us responding to the hurricane and its after effects. We could do this all the time, and there's actually a need because, the hurricane kind of brought a sense of urgency and a sense of shock. But once that kind of wore off and some things kind of got a little bit more settled, like people found homes, even if they wasn't their original homes, et cetera, those who were already suffering, like the homeless, they wind up being much more present and visible, but they were already there, right? And it was what we were doing before was inadequate to address the needs that already exist, right? On account of the different forms of exploitation that they were suffering. Right, and being made to suffer. There's a difference, being made to suffer. So that's when it popped in my head, wait, we have to figure out this system, even at its most optimal, does not work, right? But then there are just levels of tolerance that we all get socialized into that I can kind of bypass the homeless person or the sick person or the elderly person and kind of ignore that and like, what's that line from the Joker in Batman? Like, that's all according to the plan. Right? But if we disrupt the plan, then it becomes a problem. Well, we need to disrupt the plan, right? And say that, no, none of this is normal. And to that, folks, I would say, look, I'm not a Trump supporter, so don't take it wrong by any stretch of the imagination. But I think it's helpful to a degree that he gives us some of how the world actually works in an undigested form, in its raw form. Right? So I'll just bring up one example, like the Ukraine, since that's been coming up. Do y'all believe that wasn't already the established relationship with the Ukraine? Is anybody under the illusion that the United States and the other countries of Western Europe were not going to exploit Ukraine and its rebuilding process once however that gets settled? Trump just said, he just made it plain and simple, give me half your stuff. Plain, point blank. And if, you keep playing with me, I'll take 75% of it. That's already how it worked. He just kind of made it plain without the sugarcoating. Y'all gonna give me half, you're gonna pay me back, plus some interest, for doing X, Y, and Z. And like I said, y'all don't have the cards to negotiate, basically, so we just gonna call it a bluff. We need to understand that in terms of the real world and see it for what it is, because then it gives us more clarity on what we need to be doing in terms of our organizing. And I'm one here to argue that this moment provides a great deal of opportunity. And our problem as the left, we're just gravely out of position to exploit both the contradictions and the opportunities that come with those contradictions. So let me cite one that at least we've been trying to really point in our community. In our community in Jackson, there's a lot of folks on fixed income, and there are a lot of people who rely on different forms of kind of government food subsidies in one form or another to make ends meet. There's no way in terms of what we produce with our farm are we going to make up that gap tomorrow. So not here to lie to folks about that. But there's one thing that Jackson does have that we're trying to get people to understand who are in that situation, right? Without making any assumptions that everybody is able-bodied, because they are not. So they will have to figure out, some collective ways of doing things. But we're saying we have an abundance of something that a lot of places don't have. We have abundance of land that exists within the city that can be farmed. And there is nothing from, stopping us from seizing that and put it to collective utilization and purpose to meet community needs. Only thing stopping us is our imagination and will to act. That's it. They're going to be hungry too, because a good number of them rely on the same thing, right? And so, and this is a good question, because one of the critical things, and I'm going to insinuate from an old person, we have to learn how to split their forces, because they're not all united. They're not all united. And so the point is to know where to interject, and to the same degree that they know how to play divide and conquer with us, we need to learn how to play divide and conquer with them, right? Because they don't all share the same interests. I mean, before I came here, I was listening to some of the ruckus that's now clearly going on. It's been going on for a minute between Elon Musk and some of the other members in Trump's cabinet, even though officially he's not in the cabinet. But, you can kind of predict that wasn't going to ride, or it wasn't going to hold, right? Now, the question is, how do we intervene? And let me point out, the person who's been most vocal about it has been Steve Bannon, who's the principal strategist for, who kind of emerged as the principal strategist, at least of Trump's end of the so-called MAGA movement, if you want to call it that. He's made it very clear, your interests and my interests actually don't align. Because he may not use the same language we do, but Bannon also has a clear understanding to the degree that he wants to reindustrialize the United States and put workers, primarily white male workers is what he has in mind, but he wants to put workers, back in auto plants and factories. He has a clear understanding if Elon Musk, right, and Peter Thiel and Jeff Bezos, if they are running the reindustrialization program, those factories will be filled with robots, not with people. So he's very clear. There's a struggle that's going to have to be had about whose vision is actually going to make America great again. So they got contradictions amongst themselves that we have to play out. Now, that don't mean we ally with them because, they see our side. They don't. He ain't talking about helping most of the people in this room. So we need to be clear about that. But to the extent that we know we need to intervene to at least create more democratic or operable space, we have to do that. We have to do that. Now, the last thing, what I've been speaking to is about a whole framework by way of, some analogies and examples towards economic democracy. And Rick is absolutely correct. I just want you guys to just think about the broader struggle of what we need to kind of articulate. I think I've heard it from many people, but I love the way Rick kind of articulates. Just think about how many hours in your life are going to be spent, most people, going to be spent working at a job that you don't have any say over, right? It's just what the boss tells you to do, and you clock in and clock out. For most of us, it's over, almost a half of our lifetime that will be spent in some place which is basically run as a kingdom. But yet they tell us we live in a democracy. It's absurd. But it's an absurd that we've grown to kind of digest because we think this is natural and normal. Or we've been indoctrinated to believe that this is natural and normal. Well, it's not. But we have to struggle to democratize wherever we are at in order to change it and shift it. Wherever we are at, right? At the point of production, at the point of distribution, right? At the point of service, all those different things we have to struggle to democratize. And we need to do so on new terms. This is the last piece I'll say and then open it up for question. Some eggs need to be broken. That don't mean they need to be totally abandoned, but they need to be broken. And what egg am I talking about? Sometimes we put ourselves in box. This might not be the most, applauded piece of what I need to say, or what I would say, but I need to say it, is that some of the framework around the National Labor Relations Act actually hemmed us in a way that was not productive to working class actually attaining power. We need to get real about that. Right? And jettison the frameworks which does not allow us to be in solidarity with other workers because other workers need to have solidarity. Right? We can't just leave things to we only can strike or struggle or whatever on the basis of better working conditions or a better contract or better health care. As long as they still get to call the shots, as long as they have the power to hire and fire, none of those rights are ever going to be guaranteed. That's an illusion, right? It's still at their discretion. And I'm going back to this point. Remember the Capitol strike? One of their favorite toys is, all right, you unionize, I'll move my shop to Mississippi. Or I'll move it to Mexico. Or, I'll move it someplace else that has even less rights. Right? There's no contract that they are bound to adhere to as long as they are in control. So we have to organize ourselves to be the ones who control in a collective manner. I think the answers on that are very clear. We just have to get rid of the illusions that the system has maintained. And this is a good era that those who are now running the show, they're not really about maintaining illusions. They mean to rule with an iron fist, right? They are not going to be able to do everything that they want to do. Do not believe that by any stretch of the imagination, right? And as you can see in many respects with Trump's kind of back and forth over these tariffs, right? We can see that there's a certain level that he's always been serious about tariffs. Trump been talking about this stuff since, I'm 50, almost 53 years old. He's been talking about tariffs as long as I've been around on one form or another TV. So this ain't nothing new. Right? It's just how his particular view of the world. But there are some things he does pay attention to. Like he does like the opinions of rich people and all those people who play in the stock market, send them a clear message. Right? You messing with my money? And if you keep messing with my money, I'll mess with you. So he's like, well, we'll do a delay on Mexico and Canada for a couple of days. Right? The point that we should illustrate from that is, let's imagine if we were in principled unity and struggle with the workers in Canada and Mexico and would be in dialogue with them about they have their course of action. What is our course of action? Why are the corporations and these presidents getting to decide our livelihood? So there's a different set of questions that we need to be answering. And we could be encouraging them, this might be a great time to democratize your workplace in Mexico, in Canada, and all throughout the United States. Let's have that conversation and dialogue. And I bet we'll get a lot different result in a much different world if we answer it affirmatively. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Kali. That was fantastic. Thank you, Kali. This is really fantastic. I just wanted to give you some numbers because I think it's important also to be really clear of what's happening right now. We are in a situation in which these are current statistics, 52% of Americans can't meet their basic needs and save for emergencies. 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. At the same time, we have billionaire wealth has grown 3 times faster than the previous year. And it's accumulating at a level of $5.7 billion a day. In the meantime, we have 800 million people who suffer from hunger globally. So this is where we can see how political democracy is a farce without economic democracy. This level of inequality is not a matter of adjusting the redistribution, it goes much deeper. And I think here is the conversation that both Rick and Kali have brought to the table. And I think it's the conversation that we want to continue with the community. And before I open it up, I wanted to ask Eric Olson to say a couple of words. Eric is actually a student of Rick, and now he's the chair of the economics department at UMKC. And then I think Scott Carter, who's the chair of the econ department here at TU, wanted to say a couple of words, and Scott is one of the founding members of the CHE, together with Bruno Miller-Teodosio and Jizu Park, who is here also. Thank you, Eric.
Hello. Well, it's very exciting to see such a good turnout here. This is very encouraging that people would be ready to have this conversation and at this very important and critical time. So I've been working on, I do research on worker cooperatives and economic democracy. I've been working on this for quite a while now. And I think we may have lost Rick. Oh, he's here, okay.
So one thing, I think in order for Rick to hear you at best, you have to go back there. Is that correct? So
that's okay. I'll just talk from here.
You can hear him from here?
You better come back.
Do you want to use that mic at the end? We're going to ask all the questions from there.
Okay, I'll do that.
So everyone's going to have to just turn their head, but it's going to be okay. This is what happens when there's a hybrid, sorry. It's not going to be the norm. We'll have people physically here all the time, unless there's a catastrophe like in this case. Yes, in there.
Hello, Rick. How are you? Good to see you, my friend. One of the things in my own work is that I've come to realize is that there are things happening across the country today that we really should be thinking more and trying to develop. I think we see these examples on the East Coast with cooperative healthcare associates in the Bronx, for example. San Francisco Bay Area with many legacy cooperative democratic businesses there, but also in places like Kansas City, Missouri, which is where I live, where in one of my economics classes I recently described the Kansas City economy to my students, and we looked at the 5 largest businesses in Kansas City by revenue, and only one of them was a traditional capitalist business, would be what I would think of a capitalist business as. 2 employee-owned businesses in Kansas City, the 2 largest there, Black & Veatch and Burns & McDonnell, not democratic firms, but employee-owned firms, which is a step in the right direction. Largest by revenue is actually a producer cooperative, the Dairy Farmers of America, who manage dairy products for small farmers across the United States. And so it's models like these that I think that provide an opportunity for us to think differently about the economy, that there are different ways to do it, that it's not a hegemonic thing that we're never going to be able to get out from under. And there's other ways to think about this too. You know, the left has a traditional model where we always thought about it went like this, something like this. One that was very near and dear to my heart at one point too, which said, first we take state power, then we take the economy, and then we make it work equitably for the people in that economy. That's a model that's been around for a long time. I think we don't need to wait for that. We need to find the ways today that we can do tomorrow, that we can wake up to try to make this a more equitable and democratic society. And there are models out there all over the place that are waiting for us to pick up and to develop. But I did want to ask Rick, because I have a question for to suggest how is it that we get more of this? How do we get more economic democracy? How do we democratize our workplaces? Or to both of the speakers to think about those ways of organizing. There are, again, models out there. The U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, which was founded in 2004, which sounds like, wow, that's, they're almost at their 20th anniversary now, or I guess they're past their 20th anniversary. But in Italy, their Federation of Worker Cooperatives has been developing cooperatives since the 1870s. So we're really just getting started here in the United States. But I'm really interested to hear the speakers talk about how we can organize and how we can make the most out of these, the mechanisms and the things that are there for us to develop. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Khalidi. I'll be really quick here. I just want to speak when Khalidi, when you said that we lack with the things we lack. I agree with that. We also lack consciousness. We also lack an understanding. This is what the Che is about. This is why we're here. Because the academics need to know what's happening in the real world here, and you need to have a way to be able to think about it too. It's a symbiotic process. There's a lot of problems with the organizing left, okay? There's way too many problems, way too much that we have to be able to grapple with, but there's also a lot of beauty. The consciousness is what we lack, and we want the Che to be the opportunity to build that bottom-up, organically done, a working class consciousness is how I see it, and I think we can win. So thank you for showing up, and I'll let that, I'm interested to see what the questions are. Thank you.
We want the Che to be the opportunity to build that bottom-up, organically done.
Wonderful. So the plan is to go and ask the question from that mic in the back. So we democratize the space. So whoever wants to stand up and maybe go towards there, you're more than welcome. And yeah, so we can. Wonderful. Yes, that's, I think, the best.
Wonderful. So
And perhaps what we can do is collect 3 questions, and then we get our speakers to answer. Does that work? And then we can get another round.
And yeah, so we can. Wonderful. Yes, that's, I think, the best. Collect 3 questions, and then we get our speakers to answer. Does that work? And then we can get another.
Hello, my name is Sam. I had a question about nervous. You were talking a lot about Trump, and I think a lot of people who are stuck in false consciousness, they're not class conscious, are only becoming aware of how bad things are because of Trump. But, I mean, the Democratic Party exists as a way to mollify these issues to make them not seem like they're so obvious. And Trump is like just a symptom of the reactionary movement that's happening right now. So if the Democrats come back into power, people will probably, just like they always have, just not care. Like during Joe Biden's presidency, he deported more people than Trump did in his first presidency by a lot. But nobody was organizing around, stopping ICE while Biden was president. So I guess my question is, how do we organize in the face of the way that the Democrats function as a way to stop class consciousness if they are to come back into power?
Stopping ICE while Biden was president. So I guess my question is, how do we organize in the face of the way that the Democrats function as a way to stop class consciousness if they are to come back into power? Stopping ICE while Biden was president.
I want to say a real quick thing here. I really apologize that we are having a trouble with audio right now. So it is unfortunate that Rick Wolf is hearing us from the live streaming. So please understand, even though we're having a kind of messy sounds right here, please, I hope you can understand this.
Thing here. I realized that we are having a trouble with audio right now, so it is unfortunate that Rick Wolf is hearing
or should I wait?
So please understand.
Okay. Hi, my name is Bridget. I have a question surrounding investing in answers that reflect our ethics. So I worked at a health food store for 9 years, and for the past 3 years was in a union effort. And I expected retaliation from the company in the form of captive audience session meetings, in the form of lying to us, in the form of observing us more and writing us up more. I didn't expect the level of emotional manipulation. I didn't expect my employer to exploit the death of a coworker to pin pro-union and anti-union workers against each other. I didn't expect conflict to be sown between people who'd worked together for over a decade to interrupt that fight. And this health food store, there's one here in Tulsa too, it's called Natural Grocers. And I imagine that some people here shop there because a lot of the people who shop there in order to be more conscious about where they are putting their money. As I was organizing customers, a lot of customers didn't realize that they were a corporation, didn't realize that they weren't buying local, didn't realize that although they say they have a commitment to crew and to community, once it comes down to sharing power, they are not willing to do that. And now that campaign, which was run in Norman, we're talking about shifting that energy towards a worker cooperative, which would take quite a bit of time and would take quite a bit of investment. And I want all of us to think about what investing in a worker cooperative would look like as consumers. Where would you be pulling your money from? A lot of grocery stores are using prison labor now. Target is using prison labor, Costco is using prison labor, Aldi is using prison labor, Walmart is using prison labor. And as people are trying to choose a more ethical option, I think it's really important for all of us to have all of the information and to not be swayed by greenwashing and not be swayed by conflict. I was ready to protest and yell and do all of these things. I don't think I was really ready to be in deep conflict with people who I had worked with for over 10 years. So my question to both of the speakers is for you to offer some insights on what holding those really hard conversations look like, imagining building connections with workers in Canada and Mexico. That just made me so excited, but also just thinking about my tiny store in Norman, Oklahoma. I mean, I've developed health issues from like the stress of the past 3 years. And I would just really love some insight on how we navigate false information and conflict in that. Thank you.
Let's get one more question and then we get the speaker's feedback.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity. I'll try and keep my question short. I'm curious about identity. Identification as working class or the employer class or the paycheck to paycheck people, whatever that's going to be. You know, when we conceive of a working class movement in America, we think of kind of the era of Henry George when it was all laborers, people that identified as laborers. They tended to dress the same. They tended to be white males. This time around, it's got to be multi-everything. We need to mobilize, I think, in a new way to create the future that we all want. So how do we conceive in that way when we're in an era of so much division and so many artificial ways that we're split? Thank you.
Kali, would you like to start?
Check. Does it work? Okay. Yeah, there's a lot here. I would try to be as brief and succinct as possible to make more room and to allow more people in the queue. So some of this would be incomplete, just understand that, but I'm accessible if folks want to follow up later, just to put that out. Okay, one of the things I just want to bring up that was somewhat indirectly mentioned. Let me frame it back, because I do think it's important. There was a significant amount of protests against the deportations that the Biden administration was doing. And before it, the Obama administration, which also broke records at that particular point in time. The issue was you just didn't hear about it, right? Because it served a particular narrative of the Democratic Party and its kind of liberal associations when they were not in power to highlight this particular injustice, rather than to downplay it when they were in quote unquote power. And part of this is why I'm bringing this up is, you know, it is incumbent upon us to do this, going back to my point, do a level of organizing and communication which is not dependent upon, I'm gonna just call it the enemy's tools. Facebook and Twitter and all those things. Yes, they can reach a lot of people, but more increasingly and more sophisticated, they reach who those algorithms want you to reach, not everybody. So something could be happening of a very dynamic nature. You would never know about it because the algorithm has decided for whatever reason, or whatever AI program they got running the numbers now. I don't want you to see that. But so much of our movement consciousness, I would say particularly over the last 20 years, has become very dependent upon those channels of communication rather than sometimes a simple phone call or older technology. This is what I'm doing, this is what's happening, this is what we're trying to accomplish. And even better yet, create, I would argue, to really be more secure, we got to go back to face-to-face engagement to the greatest extent possible so the communication is clear and you can read somebody's eyes and their energy and their posture, and all those things are deeply important, believe me, right? In trying to figure certain things out. So I'll stop there, and where I want that to lead goes into the second piece around navigating conflict. One, I want everybody to understand that if you take up part of what I was saying about democratizing any place, there's going to be a lot of conflict in that. A lot. And some of it you should expect from the folks who are working right beside you. So do not be shocked by that. The issue is don't get pissed with them for the positions that they take, because as any of us know, from our own experience, certain things are just hard, and we don't all adjust to them being hard in the same way. And sometimes people have to kind of grow into change rather than just be kind of sprung upon them without them doing the level of digestion, going back to the education work that's necessary, right? So if you come to me, I know from say my family, there's a whole bunch of unemployment out there waiting for me. Should I challenge the boss who can fire me, right? It's not that I'm against what you're saying, but I know the reality of it is they have more power than I do, so I'm gonna sit with what I know, and you got to really convince me that there's going to be follow-up and solidarity and care on the other end, and we're going to actually stick with each other through thick and thin should and if and when we get fired before the mission is accomplished. And if you can't really sell me on that, more than likely I'm gonna stick with what I know, right? But don't get mad with folks, because of that, because that push is hard. But we all know the horror stories of people being out on the street and family being homeless and people being smoked out and all that. We all know that. So and the rulers know that. So that piece around really investing in building up deep relationships of like trust, I've learned the hard way to how important that is, right? And asking people to take certain challenges, you got to realize you're kind of asking people to take a leap of faith, but in the things that they're not necessarily accustomed to doing. And so patience, persistent, but really building up the unity so you can have hard conversations, and when you don't agree or they don't particularly see your point, be able to, like what they say, disagree without being disagreeable. Just say, hey, one day I think you'll come to see it, my way. But in the meantime, you don't agree, let's keep doing what we're doing. But at the end of the day, no, I'm gonna go do this picket, or I'm gonna go do X, Y, and Z, and just keep educating and highlighting the need, but not in a way like you dumbing somebody down or overly preaching to them. That shit gets tired after a while, and people just gonna turn you off, right? So there's a level, we exist in this weird space, and we gotta hold it. Like we got to be patient, but also urgent at the same time. And that's a hard space. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's going to come to you as a skill overnight. It's something that you learn. It's something that's different from person to person, context to context. But trust me, you got to do that if you want to, be that. And I think the point is not to condemn folks for making certain choices. And the more we understand build a relationship, the more I understand why you are sitting in this position of maybe continuing to support the boss. The more I understand that, the better organized I actually can be in being like, let's figure out a collective way to overcome this limitation, right? Rather than just condemn you as like, oh, you a traitor or you a sellout, or that ain't actually gonna get us where we need to go either. And this other piece around false narratives, I think those kind of build each other. I want to start with a mindful thing that we constantly have to challenge false narratives. So like one of the things that you brought up, about the kind of the golden era that they portrayed to most of us in the United States, from like if we go back to like Haymarket or the 1870s and all this other kind of stuff. This image of like the white male worker being the dominant form of worker, that shit was always false, right? Like my folks, the vast majority of them, they weren't white and they weren't men. They worked their fucking ass off though. And a good number of them didn't get paid a penny for the work they did right here. So this narrative that we got, well, that was like the working class, like says who? My folks built all this other shit that you're talking about, so I mean, they wasn't no white dudes doing some of this work. We don't count. That was not part of the history, or all the unpaid labor that women have done for, like that didn't count. Who fed your ass so you can get to work? That don't count. That wasn't serious labor, or who tended to you when you were sick, or watched the kids. Like all these things were valuable contributions that may not fit even within some of the frameworks, right? Sometimes I've seen the left historically get lost in abstract labors about we should only be supporting certain things of workers who produce surplus value. Well, not everything that produces surplus value is necessary for the social reproduction. So you get lost in a split between like who has power or who should be most important, who should be most focused on, that wind up excluding the vast majority of people who weren't actually in working in a particular factory, right? But they were working in the field or they were working in the house. And so if you don't come up with a strategy and a point of view that includes all of them, you're actually shooting yourself in the foot, because that winds up being a reserve army that your enemy winds up using against you or used to replace you at different points in time. So we have to construct our own narrative. This is where I'm going, and that goes back to the point around part of this next critical piece of the phase of struggle. I would argue, folks, is that we have to, and it's more urgent given what's going on now. And what do I mean by that? It's not an accident that Trump has allied himself with the tech lords. It's not an accident that he's allowing the tech lords to try to redesign government. Because one of the things that they are hoping as an outcome, at least some of them, like if you want a government service maybe in 2 years, it's gonna be like chatting with Amazon AI, not a human being. Like that's the vision that they fundamentally have about eliminating government and just making it all privatized, right? So that's not an accident. And if we continue to rely on utilizing their mediums to do our basic methods of exchange, we're actually continuing to giving them more power, right? The cloud capital, that is a real thing. And so there's a way in which we have to starve the beast, but also utilize our skill and technology to organize all the tech, because trust me, Jeff Bezos don't write code. He don't do that. So, but there are folks who do that. We need to find them and organize them and say, take your skill and expertise and do it with something else.
Khalidi. Thank you. Does Rick want to respond to the 3 questions, or should we ask other? Let's ask other 3. Rick, is it okay if we ask other 3 questions and then you respond? Because we have a lot of questions.
Can you hear me if I respond to the question? Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I've always understood that nobody can predict the future. I can't predict it. Khalidi can't predict it. Nobody can. And so for me, I've always said there's work to be done by whoever you are, wherever you spend your day. You can make a difference if you start to talk to people about these things, if you don't hold back, if you don't suffer in silence. Look, it's very, very important to have a meeting like this, to raise these issues, to have them be have us all be stimulated by what we hear one another say. So let me throw in a very few. The Trump administration cannot and will not be undone by the Democratic Party. The first person to ask a question, quite right, the Democrats are a less harsh version of the Republicans and afraid to be otherwise. It's also important to understand, and I say this as an economist, I've been an economist all my life, what the administration of Mr. Trump is doing is chaotic. It's not some grand master plan. Sure, they have some ideas here and some ideas there. They can't get themselves together. They can't get clear which of their ideas work. If you impose tariffs, you get an inflation. Half the time that Mr. Trump talks about tariffs, he thinks other people pay them and has to have it explained to him for the umpteenth time that a tariff is a tax, that the Republican Party is putting a tax when it tariffs, and that the tax is paid by Americans, not by other people. That's the nature of the tax. You know, it is childish, but you know, if you create enough chaos, maybe your idea can get in there. But I would not worry about what the best place is. If all the people in this room tonight were to begin to understand that there really are possibilities, that this system is an enormous crisis. Let me please underscore that. For the first time in a century, the United States has a serious economic competitor who's winning. It's called China. It's not a question of liking it. I'm not endorsing it. There's lots of things wrong in China. That's a separate matter. But the Chinese are a competitor, and no one in this room knows yet how that's going to play out because we haven't had it for a century. It is very, very important to understand that. The government of the United States for 20 years has tried to slow down China. It has failed. The 2 days ago, the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta announced that it has changed its view and that in the year 2025, the American economy will not only not grow, it will be in recession by over 2% loss of output. That, not me, that's the Atlanta Federal Reserve. The same authorities that explain that the United States' economy is in deep trouble are telling us that the growth of the Chinese economy this year will be in the neighborhood of 5%, and the growth in India, 7%. We can pretend all we like, but that is a reality that is changing everything. Look, we're watching a president doing bizarre things. He's going to take Greenland to make it a resort. He's going to take Gaza to make it a resort. I mean, you all know this is crazy. Don't hesitate to think it. You're right, it is. But it's interesting, why would a president be out there doing these bizarre things, destroying the neighbors north and south, who used to be the closest allies, destroying the alliance with Europe, who used to be these are acts of desperation, not of genius, not of inspiration, desperation. Yesterday, the co-founder of the Google Corporation, one of the biggest corporations in the world, a man named Sergey Brin, made a public statement that his goal is to get the American working class back to used to 60 hours a week of regular work. Not 40, 60. That's a 50% increase in the work that will be demanded. And that man was sitting on the platform right behind, if I understand correctly, Mr. Trump during the inauguration, along with all the other billionaires. I understand we have to have a respect for a system that has been in place for 200 or 300 years and has the media and has a lot of power, no question. But I want everyone, please, to understand something which the financial press in the United States already understands, that the United States isn't anymore what it was in the 20th century. The empire of the United States is over. We are in the declining phase of empire. You know, every empire goes up and every empire goes down. We are not in the position of powerlessness we might imagine. On the contrary, there are lots of breaks in this economic system. Here, let me conclude with one. The United States population is aging. It cannot sustain the Social Security system upon which tens of millions of Americans rely. It can't. It is not producing young people at a pace that will allow that to continue. The only way to do it is to bring large numbers of immigrants into the country because they're young and they work hard and they fill up the Social Security system to help the elderly. That's the truth. You can dance all day long. That's the reality. If you don't do that, you are either going to have to hit the working people with much larger Social Security deductions or deprive the elderly of what they had been promised. Any of those things will cause social disturbance in this country about which Washington and New York are already obsessing. We could have a solution if we understood what immigrants could mean rather than being self-destructive in deporting them. Those kinds of positions will be understood by the American people if we explain them. And that's why it's so important to have institutes like this, meetings like this. Every one of you can do the work of making sure people understand what's going on. And we don't leave them to the mass media because we know, don't we, what Fox News and all the others are mostly about.
Thank you so much, Rick. So we are going a bit long. So I would say let's get the last 3 questions and maybe just 1 minute remark from the speakers and we close. So 10 more minutes max, and then there's going to be dinner with Lebanese food and drinks. So you will be rewarded for your patience. I do want to say one thing. Please, when you go, if you want to receive our monthly newsletter, we're going to have one event a month. Leave your email downstairs. We're also trying to organize a community and worker center as a sister association from the CHE that is more kind of grassroots based rather than university based. So if you want to leave your phone number down there, that's the way to get involved in the organization of that. So let's do the last 3 questions. Keep them short if you can. 2 brief remarks at the end, and then we all have dinner. And thank you, Rick, for being online so long. Present yourself. Just say maybe who you are briefly. That would be lovely. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mason Judeast. I'm currently a senior in high school, and my question is, given like in the United States, the Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, it is like against the interest of nearly every member of Congress to adopt some sort of economic democracy into law, because nearly every member of Congress benefits from billionaires and owners of major companies just funding their campaigns to essentially legalize bribery. And so kind of given that systemic hurdle where it's nearly against the interest of every single legislator in our country to implement an economic democracy, what would you say is the best way to implement that while still remaining true to democratic principles? Thank you.
Howdy, y'all. My name is Xavier. I'll respect it and keep it really short and just stick to my question rather than any comments. A question that I've been asked, working around cooperative enterprise and the solidarity economy concept by people, is how does this scale? How does this address larger scale issues like what we are seeing, say, globally, like climate change or imperialism, et cetera? And like, I have an answer to this question, but I would like to know what the speakers would have to say to this kind of idea of like, is this local effort like building up, what does it amount to? How does it connect to these larger struggles? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Carlos. I come from Ecuador. My question has to do with the power of media and the situation right now with the disjointed society that we have, isolated from most everybody. To put an example, when I was questioning how fit Trump was for the presidency before the election, because I wanted to be kind to my peers, not talking about all the other stuff that came along with Trump, I got this response from my peers in Ecuador. They said, isn't Trump going to stop the wars? And that's because of the effect of media. The media not only in the US, but media all around the world. So they have a strong ecosystem, the right-wing media, extreme right-wing media. And the problem with the other side is that we are fighting each other, we're disconnected. So my question goes to, how can we, in the middle of this struggle, organize ourselves and become an ecosystem to contrast, to combat the effects of the ecosystem that the right-wing media has right now? Thank you.
Why don't we start with Rick this time? Rick, do you want to close it off 1 minute, and then we pass it to Kali?
Become an ecosystem to contrast, to combat the effects of the ecosystem that the right-wing.
Are you waiting for me? Okay, my apologies. It's just I know we're impressed with modern technology, but sometimes it's not so modern and it's not so technology either. But we'll do the best that I can. The media is no doubt a highly concentrated industry. Literally 5 or 6 major companies control most of it here in the United States, and it's not so different in other parts of the world. However, everything is always changing, and the internet gives us opportunities to reach huge numbers of people. Number 2, well, let me give you an example. I work with an organization called Democracy at Work. We've been around for about 12 years. One of the things we do is a weekly radio and television program. It goes across the United States and around the world. We currently we just crossed 500,000 YouTube subscribers. So that's an enormous community. And all we do all day long is criticize capitalism and advocate for worker co-ops. That's what we do. Everyone knows who comes that that's what we do. The audience is there. What all of us can do, even by ourselves as individuals, at our workplace, in our families, this is how change happens. The good question about how you go from micro level to macro level, we will all be doing that. When you work at the micro level, that becomes a problem. If you can get people at your store or at your workplace or in your home thinking and talking, out of that comes the ways we bind together to have macro effects. Let me remind you of history. Capitalism begins by tens of thousands of little businesses emerging out of feudalism with an owner and 3 or 4 workers. It took them centuries to get their act together to create the macro system that supports them, from the Federal Reserve to modern governments to all the rest of it. The micro is where it starts, the macro evolves out of it. Don't worry, that is already happening. There are efforts all over the United States to get people together now to fight. It's partly the recognition, which I hope many of you can be open to, that the Democratic Party gave up a long time ago. They came out of the greatest collapse of capitalism in its history, the Depression of the 1930s, when they put forward a very radical program. You know what the radical program was in the 1930s? To give every American over 65 a pension check for the rest of their lives. We had never had that in America before. Roosevelt advocated for it. Unemployment insurance. We had never had that in America, but the New Deal coalition pushed Roosevelt to do that. The first minimum wage we ever had in America. Yep, in the middle of the Great Depression, pushed by the New Deal coalition, and it forced on Roosevelt, the president. And finally, 15 million people hired by the federal government to give them a job and an income. The most radical program any president had dared to advocate. And you know what the American people did? They reelected him 3 times. The most popular president in American history had the nerve to do what today's Democratic Party doesn't imagine doing. That means you and me and people like us have to find other ways from the bottom up to recreate the political force that can make change. Don't imagine it isn't possible. Last thing. One country in Europe decided not to go with the others, not to turn against immigrants, not to deport them, not to do what Trump or Obama or Biden did. One country, in case you don't know, it's the country of Spain. Spain welcomed immigrants and still does. And here's a little factoid. Spain has the most healthy, growing economy of any country in Europe. So don't let people tell you that the deportation is some kind of necessity. It's only a necessity if you allow the people at the top to play immigrants against people born here, which of course they will try always to do. We are a lot stronger than the mass media in this country like to allow us to recognize. Keep that in mind too, please.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you so much. And we hope to have you in person with us very, very soon. And Kali, last words to you.
I'll be as brief as I can. So, yeah, I'm just going to build off of what Rick said, which I agree with completely. Just to add on a particular point around how do we get, to the scale up. Rick gave an answer I was going to give. Only thing I would add to it is that there is a particular process of federation to get to that particular point that we need to do on an intentional level at this scale, I think now in the United States. Worker cooperatives in particular are still small in number, few and small in number in the United States. It doesn't have to remain that way. We have to figure out a way, I think, to both partner with the sections of organized labor which are willing to be partnered with and push each other towards aggregation and control over more sectors of the existing kind of means of production. I'll add that particular piece as the next phase where I think we need to go. The liberal media is just as strong, if not stronger, and more dangerous than the right-wing media. I hope folks are clear about that. If you think CNN and MSNBC are telling you more truth than Fox, you got a problem. They tell a particular spin on things. They may actually present a select number of facts, but a select number of facts is not the full picture. All right, it's not the complete picture. And what we need is as much accumulated knowledge from all of us as possible to get the full picture. That's not what they offer. That's not what they've ever offered or ever will offer. They're select in propping up the existing system and the existing worldview, so it's just an echo chamber at best of what already exists, which is a problem, has always been a problem, and was designed to be a problem. Like this notion that somehow the capitalist system is broke or has been broken, it's doing exactly what it was always intended to do, right? So I think we need to be clear about that. And then the other one was, I didn't finish taking a note, but we are not going to, and this is a piece where we have to figure out how to struggle with each other on this one. But it goes back, I think, to the first question, which I didn't really come to deal with, and I apologize for that. I didn't answer it in part about the Democratic Party because I just don't have nothing to do with them. And so anybody who knows my history knows that, but I shouldn't assume that, right? And so I've been a vehement enemy of that institution all of my adult life because it is the graveyard of social movements. You've heard that before. I reiterate it. I've recently been living through an experiment in Jackson where we were able to get some close friends and comrades to actually I always say in Jackson, we won a popularity contest. We did not seize state power. Do not confuse winning the mayorship, or it's not what we did. We won a popularity contest, and we faced the limits of our popularity by capital very quickly, right? And because of our differences that emerged, there was someone already there, being honest, but the differences that emerged on how we choose to mediate the struggle, right? So there's some of us who think that we should press even when we may be in the minority and not make certain compromise, and there's others think, well, we should delay. And there's times in which, you can do that. But at the end of the day, I would argue that our folks were captured by the Democratic Party in our context, even though we had done a tremendous amount of study going into that to not be captured, it still wind up happening. So do not be under some illusion that you or your comrades, if you choose to play that game, are going to be actually stronger than the dynamics of the system itself. You will not be. So it's best not to play that game. Now, that doesn't mean to totally abandon electoral politics. That's not what I'm saying. I believe you use every avenue of struggle that you have available to you to get where you need to go. But putting all your eggs in that basket or within that party is definitely going to be a losing end of the stick. So I'm an advocate that we have to build our own, be patient. It's that piece around the organizing and patience and the urgency that we have to learn how to navigate. That's one of the clearest ways and clearest positions of what we need to do. But at this particular point in time, and I'll end on this, look, by all indications, by even their own media and their own pollsters, that Democratic Party, we understand, is almost done, right? It's like I saw something, 2 or 3 different sources, like 20% approval rating right now, right? And James Carville's running around talking about our best thing is just be quiet and shut up and just let the Republicans do it. That's our best strategy, right? He can say that because he actually doesn't fundamentally agree when you get down to it. He doesn't disagree with what Trump and them are doing. Right? So be clear that their interests and your interests actually don't align. And they're going to continue to get a lot worse, right? Even more so to a degree. But that's another conversation. But at least the older wing of it. But hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully this was, inspiring. Appreciate all the questions. Sorry we didn't get to more. But again, I think both me and Rick are accessible. We might not get to you tomorrow, 5 minutes from now, but folks definitely respond to emails, calls, texts. So please reach out and definitely stay in contact with the program as it seeks to grow and advantage and be a tool in your own backyard. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kali. Thank you. This is wonderful. Let's keep up the momentum. This was a collective effort to get all of us here. There's so many of you that helped out. Let's try to keep the community going. Please come to our next events on April 5th. It's a Saturday. We'll have 2 hours, so more time for questions. And yes, let's keep it up. I think we can do something very interesting here all together if we build a community. Thank you for being here. And there's food and there's also drinks. You have to get a little ticket for the drink. You have one each. Very sober, very austere here.